Welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright Jr., your go-to wellness coaches of StressFreeNow.info. Our featured guest today is Christine Lane, founder of Mind Over Money Consulting. Now, because Christine has the same name as mine, she's graciously agreed to be Chris today, which is also her nickname and mine. Chris Lane helps clients get a handle on their finances at conscious and subconscious levels. She provides consulting, training, and education at the intersection of money and the psychology of money. Chris received her master's degree in psychology from Catholic University of America and is a certified master trainer. She started her career as a corporate trainer, instructional designer. Over time, she reached the director level in the corporate world due to her skill in managing corporate budgets, as well as her strong training skills and understanding of how people learn best. Today, she combines these diverse experiences to coach and educate professionals on best practices for managing their finances so that they get results they want. Chris leads groups and workshops on financial literacy and works directly with clients one-on-one. Her money literacy approach helps you win the inner game with money by giving you the proper mindset to achieve your financial goals. Additionally, Chris helps you put together the necessary plans and accountability systems so that you can take full charge of your financial affairs. Importantly, with Chris's guidance, you too can learn that managing your money is about more than just the math, so that your mental goals begin to sync with outward financial results. Chris, welcome. We're so happy to have you here today, and thank you for talking about this subject that is near and dear to many, I believe.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Yes, thank you, Chris. This is a real treat to have two Christines on the show at the same time. I'm glad that we worked it out so that our audience is clear in their minds. But I think it'll be really clear who's talking when. But it's a real treat to have two Christines on at the same time. And I think, as Christine mentioned before the show, that we had the pleasure of having Dr. Bob, the sports doctor, on, and that was the first time we had two Dr. Bobs. So I think it's very fitting that we have two Christines, and we look forward to this just being your first of many visits with us, because you are here today talking about a very, very, very important topic that affects everyone, which is money. Okay, so Christine, Chris. Well, that's what, that's how it happens in real life. Well, at least I'm remembering your name. And
yes.
So good. So please share your story with our audience of how you came to found your company, Mind Over Money. That is an amazing and a fantastic company name.
Oh, well, thank you. And yeah, I'd be happy to share the story. So, I had sort of an interesting trajectory to get here. Actually, in my youth, I was pretty good with money. My parents taught me pretty well, and I used to save my birthday money in my allowance, and I would put it in the little passbook savings. If people are old enough to remember the days that you went down to the bank and got the money written in the little passbook, and I always thought that was really cool. And when I got my first job out of college, and by the way, if you want to have a lucrative job when you get out of college, do not major in psychology and stop with a bachelor's degree. That doesn't work well. I got a very low-paying job in a lab right out of college, but I saved money, I did well, I managed it well, and then I said, okay, I need to further my career, I need to go to graduate school. And at that point, I had to take out loans. And that's when it all started to unravel for me. I moved to Washington, D.C. to go to graduate school, which is not known for its low cost of living. And I went to an expensive graduate school because I had never really had to deal with debt before. And $10,000 was the same as $30,000 in my mind. Once you were in debt, it didn't matter. And I wound up with about $37,000 worth of student loans back in the 90s, which would be closer to $60-some-thousand today. And went, oh no, I have to dig out of this, but I still want to live in the really cool areas of D.C., and I bought a nice car, and I bought a new wardrobe because I was lucky to come out when the economy was doing well enough for me to have a job. But I'm just floundering with paying off all these debts. And, I knew I could be good with money, but I didn't really know how to deal with debt. But I got myself educated on personal finance. I made a plan. I made some serious lifestyle changes and actually managed to pay off my loans early. But then flash forward, but I'm working in the corporate world, I'm working in the world of training, and I'm working with budgets within my corporate world, and it turns out I'm really good at that. Flash forward about 20 years, although I hate to say that I'm that old, but flash forward about 20 years, I'm the director, and we have a lot of entry-level young employees, people that were former versions of my 20-something self. And talking with a group at one point about our 401k plan. Everybody knows you should be invested in your company's 401k. And one of my younger employees said, "Oh, I can't invest in the 401k. I can't afford to. I wouldn't be able to eat." And forgetting what my 20-year-old self was like, I just kind of rolled my eyes. That's ridiculous. I'm the director of this group. I know how much money everybody makes. I know she makes enough money to eat and put 6% in a 401k. And then I thought, well, where was I at 20? 25, 26, 27. I had nothing. I had nothing in a 401k, $0. I was paying off my student loans. I wasn't saving anything long term. And I went to her and I said, I was exactly where you are at your age. I was dealing with the student loans. I wasn't saving, but I'm in a really good situation now because I really learned about this stuff. And if you want help, I can help you. And she said, kind of to my surprise, she said, I need help. Please help me. And we sat down together and we looked over her finances and we made her a plan because she had credit card debt and student loan debt. And the relief for her when she learned how to do this and when she learned there was a way out and when she saw the plan, God, that was so satisfying for me. It was so great for her. She started telling her friends started coming to me, and I started thinking, hey, this might be something I want to do as my next career move. I've been doing this in the corporate world for a long time. I may be ready to make a change, and I took the plunge. Said, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it as a company, and that's maybe a long-winded answer to your question, but that's how it got started.
Great. That is a fantastic story, which I'm sure all of our listeners can relate to, because when you're in your teens and early 20s, you often don't know what direction. Some people are lucky to know from the time they're small kids, oh, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be an engineer. I've met people like that. And then there are other people that say, well, I'll major in liberal arts, or maybe I'll go to law school or whatever. And so what you have described is fairly typical for some people. So, Chris, I want to ask you this next question. Based on your experience of working with clients and listening to people, what are the main internal and external obstacles people are facing when they are trying to achieve the financial goals? Christine and I talk about the differences between what are you up against. We had another guest named Dr. Maria Nemeth, who wrote the book, The Energy of Money, and she talks about the different aspects of money, that the money game is mainly a mental and emotional game to some degree. So the obstacles that people can face are internal and external. Can you enlighten us on that?
Sure, absolutely. That is definitely one of the first questions I ask people when they're considering working with me is, what do they think has kept them from getting where they want to be with their finances so far? And the way you're dividing it in terms of internal and external obstacles is an important divide. The answer I get, unsurprisingly, the first time from people is, I don't have enough money, or I have too much debt, which is kind of an external obstacle. There's something out there that they don't have or that's been put upon them. And the thing about the external obstacles is people often feel like they don't have much control over that. They're just sort of at the mercy. Well, I don't have enough money. What could I do? But when you dig a little further, when you get into really dig into their situation, look at their numbers, I certainly don't want to dismiss the external obstacle of not having enough money. For some people, that really is the number one obstacle. But for most people, it's not. For most people, the internal obstacles are far bigger than the external obstacles, but they're not realizing that. So for most people, I'd say the number one internal obstacle that they need to get around is fear. Their fear of looking at their situation accurately and seeing what their numbers really are. Fear of learning how to manage money because they just think it's this big, scary thing and that it's hard to do. And because they don't feel like there is a solution, so it's easier to just not look. So that's the number one internal obstacle that I see with my clients is the fear. And then the second big internal obstacle is really a combination of inertia and established habits. So when it comes to spending or planning or managing their money, people have habits of spending without thinking, or they simply have the lack of a habit of paying attention to where their money's going, to trying to make a budget, to try to look. So, and overcoming those habits requires a lot of energy up front to put in new habits to overcome inertia. But once you do that, once you make a plan and put some new habits into place, it kind of takes on a life of its own, and it really gets moving. And for most of the people that I have talked to and that I've worked with, the fear can be overcome when you actually look at the numbers, because for most people, that external obstacle of I don't have enough money is not as big a part of the problem as they think it is. Most people, when they really look, can find that there is probably enough coming in that will get them to, that they can get where they need to be if they put the right habits in place. And even if they find that there is not enough coming in, occasionally I'll see this with people I talk to. Yeah, you really are doing everything you can to work with what you have and there isn't enough. There are usually some options for bringing in more money that they maybe haven't considered or haven't wanted to consider, but once they look at it squarely, once they face the fear and go, okay, I can't make this work unless I bring in more money, then the wheels can start turning on how can I bring in more money. But you're not going to solve those problems until you face them. Does that give you any additional sort of vision around how that's working?
Yes, that's very, very, very helpful, and I'm sure our audience appreciates that.
You know, Chris, as I was listening to you, that really is very clear. And what it brought to mind was that something I can add to the question I had for you next is it occurs to me that the practice of giving children an allowance, if it still exists today, people don't talk about that. So that what I wanted to ask you is it seems, you know, some people just naturally know how to take care of the money. They know what's coming in. They know what's going out. They're not in debt, even if they're spending. They just automatically seem, or outwardly, it automatically seems that they know what to do. And for others, it's just really difficult to handle money. As you said, they may be overspending, under-earning, whatever it is. But then that thought of an allowance came back to my mind. So why is it so hard for some people to manage their money?
Well, you know, it's interesting that you bring up the allowance question. This is something I have very strong feelings about, and actually tried to find some good data on, and I could not find good data. But recently, a prospective client of mine was saying to me that she didn't want my help for her, but she wanted my help for her children because she was trying to teach them how to manage money and trying to deal with this exact issue, the allowance question. I was given an allowance. My allowance was not tied to chores, but I also had certain financial responsibilities for my own life that had to come out of my allowance. And in my world, books was one of the things. I was a reader, and I had to buy my own books. If we wanted to do things with our friends, say go to the movies, go bowling, go roller skating, we had to pay for that ourselves. Our presents that we bought our parents and our siblings for birthdays and Christmas and that kind of thing, that came out of our own money. The rest of it, and also we had a sort of a little charity budget that we had to give, so that was part of our training. I feel like that taught me wonderfully well how to manage money. And my parents were not the type, like if I were to whine, if I were to run out of money and whine about wanting more, nope, they were not giving into that. We had to manage what we had. So this prospective client of mine was saying, how do I do this for my kids? She doesn't do an allowance, even though they're older than I was when my parents started with it. And I said, well, you know, here's how I feel like allowances should be used. Here's how I feel like they work for me. What was so interesting was there is nothing in her kids' lives that they want that they don't already have. So, for example, I said, you know, you've got to find some stuff that they would want and make them responsible for paying for it and give them an allowance. And all they want really is to play in their extracurriculars, which of course, for the most part, if you're 9, 10, and 11, your parents are paying for your softball team. Your parents are not making you pay for an extracurricular. That's a much bigger deal than buying a book. And they want the data plans on their cell phones or their iPod touches, and that's part of a family plan. And actually, they have theirs through work. And we had the hardest time coming up with something that the kids might actually want that we could give them an allowance for that they would have to pay for. The world has really changed in that regard. That being said, that was the goal I gave her. Figure out what your kids want that you're maybe already paying for. Make them respond. Give them an allowance once a week to start with. By the time I was in high school, it was once a month, and then eventually I got a part-time job, then my parents cut my allowance, which was quite a lesson. So I believe. Yeah.
Wait, say that part again, Chris. About what your parents do? What they do?
Once I got a part-time job, my parents stopped giving me an allowance.
Oh man!
I know. I hadn't thought of that properly before I got the job.
Can you describe the facial reaction of your mother and father when they said, "Well," were you actually in shock when they told you?
You know, I'm trying to remember how that worked. Honestly, I think I was really proud of being able to make my own money and to be able to cover things, and I think that was built in from the years where I did have to manage my own money, where we were clear that I was making at that point a lot more than I was getting as an allowance. So I'm trying to remember when they said we're not going to give you your allowance anymore. I think they waited to the point where I had saved enough money that the allowance, the $20 a month allowance. This is just going to go back to how long ago this was in inflation. In high school I got $20 a month for my allowance, which I used to buy snacks and things with friends, and I was making $100 a week once I started working, so the $20 a month wasn't that big a deal anymore.
Okay, great.
But yeah. I was just telling my mom about the allowance and how it worked, and I was like, when you used to make me my lunch, but I would get a soda and a snack with the lunch, and I would get that at the cafeteria. She's like, we made you buy your own lunch? I'm like, yeah, but you gave me the allowance and I had to budget. That was the whole deal. That was a good thing. That was training me well. She is somehow now horrified that she made me buy my own lunch out of allowance that they gave me in high school. But that is how you can really learn. That's how you learn to budget it.
That was too funny, but it occurs to me that with your clients' children, since what they wanted was paid for, then, I don't know, they could save up for the expense for their house, their college. They would be saving really, their allowance.
One of them wants a computer, and I said, okay, she should save for her own computer. And this is maybe going too far afield, but in a way we have become a richer society in some respects and much poorer in others. Certain things are, in some ways it's much harder to make ends meet because housing prices, education prices, and healthcare prices have gone up, certainly from the time I was a child. Well outpaced real salaries or adjusted salaries. But physical things have actually gotten much cheaper. So cell phones are relatively cheap. I mean, as you all probably remember what cell phones cost in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, and they were only for rich people, and now 10-year-olds have them because they're not that expensive relative to what people make. So I think the fact that stuff has gotten cheaper has made it harder for kids not to have all the stuff that they want because it's not a big part of the family budget anymore. And that's a bit of a sidetrack, but I do think that's part of why it is somewhat harder for parents today to really instill that into kids. And kids can now have credit cards, which I'm horrified by, but that's another story.
Right. So are all these are contributing factors to not being able to manage money because of the societal changes or the structural changes in how?
I think it definitely is. And now, not everybody was lucky enough to have the kind of financial education I got in my youth. Many of my friends did not. So I think it is harder for responsible parents today who want to teach it. I think they're up against a harder playing field. I think, though, that it's always been there with parents who didn't know how to teach it or didn't know it themselves. So certainly a lot of my peers, the allowance situation was not handled always as well as perhaps it was in my family. And
so in your practice, Chris, then there's a certain aspect of teaching.
Absolutely.
Adults what to do. Okay, along with their mindset.
Absolutely.
Okay,
that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, fantastic. So let's continue this conversation. We want to take a short break here. So audience, we'll be back in a moment on Learn to Live Stress-Free with our special featured guest today, Christine Lane.
Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Wright, Jr., the Stress Relief Doctor, co-host of the Learn to Live Stress-Free podcast series. I'm an author, speaker, and stress management wellness coach. My published study is the first to show the connection between stress reduction, grief recovery, nitric oxide spiking, and the relaxation response. And my practical application of this knowledge helps you relieve the stresses of everyday life. I have the tools to dissolve your pain points quickly and effectively. Email me to find out how you can start to feel better now at stressfreenow.info/contact. That's stressfreenow.info/contact. Have you been procrastinating about completing an important project or pursuing a treasured dream? Christine Wright specializes in helping her coaching clients to lay out clear, elegant strategies. She shows you how to quickly build your confidence to uncover and eliminate your habitual patterns of resistance and self-sabotage. Christine helps you discover those meaningful insights that will get you to do what works so you can celebrate your successes. Go to stressfreenow.info/contact to let Christine know that you're ready to live your ideal life now. Again, that's stressfreenow.info/contact.
Welcome back to Learn to Live Stress-Free as we continue our conversation with our featured guest, Christine Lane, talking on Mind Over Money. Chris, continuing our conversation, with managing money and such, and even what people think about money, is there a relationship, or what is the relationship between money and happiness?
Oh, wow. That is a complex issue with which researchers have been trying to untangle for quite a while now. The short answer is yes and no, just to make it complex. Certainly, worrying about money, having stress around money, absolutely impacts your happiness, obviously in a negative way. But then there's how does spending money, having money, spending money, does that create happiness? Of course, we have the old adage, money does not buy happiness. But then again, how many people don't want more money, right? You might believe that money doesn't buy happiness, but if I told you were going to get a 50% raise or win the Powerball next week, would you say, no thanks, I don't think that's going to make me any happier? Yeah,
I wouldn't say that.
Most people really want money, and what the researchers have found, and psychologists are studying this, and economists are studying this, is that on the day-to-day basis, having more money does not impact your mood at any given moment. So, but the flip side is the more money you make, when they ask you how do you feel about your life overall, people rate their lives as better the more money they have. But if they give them, say, a little ticker that goes off at certain points during the day and ask them how happy are you right at this moment, that doesn't correlate with money. And there's a reason for that. When people imagine winning the Powerball or getting the 50% raise, they start thinking about all the wonderful things they would do with it. Maybe they're going to buy a great new car. Maybe they're going to buy the iPhone 7 or whatever the latest iPhone is at the time they're listening to this podcast. 3 weeks from now, we could be on to the iPhone 8. I don't know. But humans have this wonderful ability called hedonic adaptation. And what that means is we get used to stuff. And this is a really useful feature in the human brain. So if something really awful happens to you, you can eventually adjust it and kind of come back to your emotional baseline. Something I usually say as an example of how this works is, imagine if we all still felt today the way we felt on 9/11. Most people have moved on, you've incorporated it, yes, it was a horrible thing, and yet we eventually return to our normal state. The same thing happens when we purchase good, exciting things. So you get a new car, and maybe for 3 months you're excited about your new car, but eventually you're just annoyed that you're sitting in traffic in a really nice car. And so what we find is, what the researchers have found, is that when spending money, there are a lot of things that you can spend on that are highly subject to this hedonic adaptation. And if you spend money on those things, you wind up on what they call the hedonic treadmill. Shoes might be a perfect example of this. For example, I think there's actually a book out there that says women can never have too many shoes, right? What's the perfect amount of shoes? One more. So the reason for that is shoes, like most physical things that you can buy, are very subject to the hedonic adaptation. You get them and you get an initial jolt, and they're awesome, and the first time you wear them, they're great. But 3 weeks later or 3 months later, they're just another pair of shoes. So to get that same jolt, you have to go back and buy a new pair of shoes, which is why some folks can wind up with 500 pairs of shoes, because the jolt, the happiness level you get from it doesn't last very long. One of the things that I try to teach my clients is the researchers have discovered things you can spend money on that actually have a much longer lasting impact on your happiness. And those types of things are generally not physical things. And it's an interesting paradox because physical things that last a long time don't tend to enhance your well-being as much as experiences, things that you're doing to develop yourself, develop your skills, spending money on classes and lessons or therapy or anything like that that makes you sort of a better, more capable person. Anything that you can spend money on that enhances your relationships. So visiting family out of state, spending time with friends if that's going out to dinner, anything, playing a sport that gets you into the state of flow, if you've ever heard of the flow state that psychologists talk about. Those are the types of things that give more lasting happiness. And travel. Travel is a big one because the process of anticipating the travel gives you almost as much pleasure as the travel itself. And then remembering the experience of travel adds to your sense of identity. So it's paradoxical that spending money on ephemeral things actually gives more back to your life. Spending money on physical things puts you on the hedonic treadmill. And the worst thing you can do, and this is where I see a lot of my clients stuck, is they're on the hedonic treadmill, spending money on physical things, trying to stay happy, creating stress and worry because then they don't have enough money for basics like their bills or savings. So they're not getting the hit very long on the stuff they're buying, but they are creating this underlying stress. So a huge part of getting that under control is to start getting it under control to where you get rid of the money stress and then develop enough that you can start to spend in ways that are real investments in your life.
Well, Chris, with an answer like that, I'm going to actually call you Christine. You have, I want to thank you, and I know our audience really appreciates the explanation. What I want to say is that you have opened the door for us to do another podcast with you and perhaps a couple of other people as a panel where we could talk to this issue of buying shoes. And I want to add a caveat here. When I have been in discussions with people after I got over the shock that a person had over, let's say a woman had over 1,000 pairs of shoes and then would not say how many more than 1,000 she had. What I have discovered is that there are many men that have over 500 pairs of sneakers. And I had not been aware of that. However, I think the most significant thing that you have said here in this regard is the distinction you've made between physical and or I should say tangible and intangible. For example, you said that travel and building close relationships with others tends to actually be an antidote to the hedonic treadmill that you're actually talk about when people are buying these physical goods. And so I want to thank you for that and let you know we will be calling you back to come back on another show where we could really talk about that. You know, Chris and I love to travel. I've been to almost 60 countries. And I could tell you the issue with travel is that, in fact, I've written a couple of articles about it, and including a research paper, now that I think about it, about how travel is actually a form of education that not only does it change you, because when you come back from your trip, let's say you take a trip to Indonesia or Thailand or someplace in South America, so it changes you by impacting with these different cultures and the experiences that you have when you're traveling, because unexpected things happen when you're traveling, but it also changes the people that you meet. And I know, and I'm going to say this, that this will be surprising for many people. For the most part, I have found two variables which have greatly impacted my travel when I reflected on them. One, when I stayed in low-end accommodations, like in the youth hostel, I found that I met many, many, many people, and my travel experience in hindsight was just amazing compared to if I stayed in a 4 or higher star hotel. And then the other thing I found is that I had done trips where I was hopping around 2 days here, a day here, 3 days here, and those trips turned out, when I tried to remember, it was a blur. When I stayed a week or more in a place, my memory and my enjoyment in hindsight was so much greater than when I was hopping around. So those two things surprised me, and I think that so thank you for indicating that it's the intangible things that tend to really form the strong memories and keep us off that hedonic treadmill. Although I'll just close by saying this, I was on a cruise one time and I met two ladies, and they were taking cruises every 2 months. And I said to one woman, "Well, how do you do it?" She says, "Well, I leave my husband home and I don't have any furniture in my house."
You know, it's interesting what you said about your experiences with travel and the two different ways you've traveled and how it has a different impact. There's actually a good psychological explanation as to why the slower travel would have more lasting impact. Travel can work in a couple of different ways in terms of creating happiness. One of them is that, as you probably know, whenever you're focused on the present moment, you tend to be more at peace. And what they've actually found is that travel, in the sense that it's novelty, tends to focus people on the present moment. That's one way travel has an impact. Another way is that travel is often experienced shared with friends, family. So if you're adding the novelty and the connection, and it sounds like when you travel in the hostels and when you stay in one place, there's a real element of human connection there. So you're getting a double bang for your buck. You're getting the break from the routine and the novelty, which focuses you on the moment, and you're adding an element of connection, which really increases the power of travel in terms of the value it's adding to your life.
Right, and I just want to say what I found was that at the in the lower tier, especially in the youth hostels, people were really down to earth, and they were really into sharing information and looking for, here's something that's for free we can do together. And also in the hostels, I remember being in Brazil, where the staff of the hospital invited us to go out to a nightclub and come to their homes. I mean, it's just amazing. And I know I was in Bermuda, and they have this thing called Boxing Day. And I remember walking down the street, and people were beckoning me to come into their homes. And I said, well, but I don't know you. They said, oh, come on inside, and they invited me in their homes for the tea lunch, et cetera. So that was like kind of amazing being from New York. People are not beckoning you to come into their homes. Okay, I'll say that.
Right, definitely.
So, Chris, could you tell us what is the effect of self-talk on the money equation? If people are going around feeling that they don't have enough money, they can't make enough money, they're deeply in debt, they can't. How can you eliminate that? And how does having that negative talk impact your feelings about money or your ability to make money?
Well, not surprisingly, negative self-talk around money does not lead to positive outcomes with money. And you're right that is a real internal obstacle that many people struggle with, many of my clients struggle with. So in terms of how do you overcome that negative self-talk, we talked about one of the biggest internal obstacles is fear. Fear that there's just no way out of this, they can't manage the money. So I see two ways to approach eliminating that negative self-talk. The fastest way, and the way I do this with my clients, is to face down that fear, see where the numbers really are, and make a plan to make them better. And that's a tricky thing to do because people are afraid to look at it. And so the value in having somebody work with you is just give me the raw data, I will look at it, and I will come back with a plan. What I have found is that once I come back with a plan and say, look, all right, here's where you are now, but here's where you can be in 2 years, here's where you can be in 5 years, and they see the possibility for improvement, they see the possibility for growth, it sets up a light switch almost immediately, and the way they think about money changes because they now see the possibility. Once you see the possibility, it changes the way you think about it. Now, that's option one, is to jump right in, look at the numbers, hardcore, make a plan. That's maybe a little bit harder to do if you're in sort of a do-it-yourself mode, if you don't have a coach that's helping you, because it's really hard to break past that initial fear. And it's also, you're not yet familiar with the best way the practical side of the best way to run the numbers. So you're busy trying to figure out how do I work through these numbers to get to, so you have to stay in the fear a little bit longer while you're trying to work it out. So for people trying to do it on their own, one of the things to start with is, I mean, this is sort of simple in the world of self-help, but start with affirmations and start with listening to me right here, right now, tell you that this is easier than you think it is. It really is. The math is not hard. I say this as somebody who failed calculus twice, which is why I became a psychology major. I did. I started as a computer science major my freshman year, failed calculus twice, moved over to psychology. So it's not, the math is not hard. The concepts aren't hard. It's just that people are afraid of them, so they make it harder than they need to be. So start by just telling yourself, hey, this is probably easier than I think it is. If you want to, jump right into, I can learn to manage money. And then start with what I call some of the easier books to look at. So there's a ton of books written about personal finance. There's a ton of blogs out there. But I tend to recommend people start with what I call the Oprah authors. So Susie Orman, David Bach, I'm sure everybody's heard of Susie Orman. David Bach's written a number of books, and he's been featured on Oprah. Start Late, Finish Rich is one I like to recommend to people that are afraid if they feel like, oh my God, I can't ever get there. He will make you feel better. And there are a whole realm of things you can get into, but for people that are trying to overcome that self-talk, I would say working with a coach is a great way to do it. It can turn things around really, really quickly. But if that's not the luxury that you have, start with the basic affirmations, and believe me when I tell you, it is not impossible. It's something that can be learned. Ordinary people can learn it. If you have a college degree in psychology and you failed calculus twice, you can get good at this. And look online. There's some great blogs. One of my favorites is a blog called Punch Debt in the Face, about a young kid graduated from college, digging his way out of student loan debt. Although he kept going past the point where he's out of debt, and now he's got lots of money, and honestly, it's just a little bit jealous-making if you're in the early days. So just read the first part of his blog and, save the rest for when you've gotten yourself on good ground. That's kind of what I would say is if you can work with somebody to get through those numbers really quickly and see the potential upside, it will change your thinking so much. One of my clients, I love telling the story, she, huge student loans, over $200,000. And she's a musician. Not a doctor, not a lawyer, she's a musician. And she came to me, she didn't even want to tell me what she was dealing with. And she said that she literally spent 80% of her time worrying about money. Talk about stress. Talk about her life was consumed with this stress. And honestly, I have to admit, when I first got her numbers, I thought, I hope I can help her. I don't know. Ran her numbers, came out with a plan. And fortunately, she's a musician that's doing reasonably well as a local musician, and also had a part-time day job to help out. And I said, okay, look, it's not going to be easy, but in 10 years, you can be free of all of this debt. By the time you're 40, it'll be done. And even though she's still got many years to go on a plan, the stress is over. She talks about money so much differently now. Like, she just felt like it was this thing and she was stuck forever. Now she's like, I have a plan. I know what I'm doing. Her confidence level has soared just by facing the facts of the numbers. And it's not easy. It's a 10-year plan, and it's a long plan, and she's going to, be living a shoestring lifestyle for that 10 years, but it's going to get there and it's going to get done. And her entire attitude changed almost overnight.
That is wonderful, Chris. I really want to thank you. And, I have to say, those authors that you have mentioned and speakers that you've mentioned, I'm familiar with them. And what I find with David Bach, his approach is so plain and simple and very clear and direct. So for someone starting out, he's a really great start. And one thing that one of the people that I've heard speak, and it may sound trite, it may sound harsh, but it's really very simple. He says, either spend less or earn more. That's really the basis of the equation. But as you said, it's helpful to work with a coach, especially if you have certain negative thoughts that are hard to get rid of, or if you're consumed with fear. So working with a coach, someone like you, is helpful in getting you out of this. So, Chris, Bob and I want to thank you for all the great information you shared today with our audience, and I'm sure that they will find what you've had to offer helpful. And in terms of offering now, I know, we take this time where you can tell us how people can get in touch with you, and I know that you have an offer for our listeners, so could you tell our listeners about that?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, for today's listeners, I've got a special offer that I'm doing 30-minute free strategy sessions to basically look at what your situation is, give you some ideas as to how you can improve and get a little bit closer towards your goals. So if anybody's interested in that, just go ahead and email me and reference this podcast, Stress Free Now. Do you want me to give the email address?
Oh, yes, please do.
Okay. So it is Christine, Christine, Lane, Lane, so all one word, Christine Lane, at Mind Over Money Site, so Mind Over Money, SITE.com.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So, listeners, you can get Chris's offer by emailing her at Christine Lane at Mind Over Money Site, that's SITE.com. So her website is Mind Over Money Site. She's also on Facebook, so you can check her at facebook.com/Christine Lane Mind Over Money. And her name is like mine, CHRISTINE LANE, all one word. So again, thank you so much for being on the show, Chris.
Oh, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Chris, what final thoughts or key idea would you like our audience to take away from today's broadcast?
If there was one thing I'd like everybody to come away with is that this managing money is totally doable. It's not as hard as you think it is. And if you just jump in and start, you are going to wind up in a better place next year than you are this year. If money is a source of stress in your life, you can absolutely ameliorate it. You just have to get started.
Great. Wonderful, Chris. I want to thank you so much for being our featured guest today. And audience, I want to thank you for listening wherever you are and whatever time zone you're in right now. We have often been surprised at how far our podcasts go, and to Australia, Japan, Germany, Ghana. And so thank you so much for listening, no matter what time it is right now. So we appreciate your presence and trust that you have benefited in some way from the information we delivered today on the show. Certainly talking about money, which affects everyone, is helpful. So if you'd like to comment on our show, please contact us through our contact form with your feedback and suggestions. Remember, listeners, if you'd like to experience the same benefits our coaching clients get with us, including learning how you can get more results in your day and easy ways to dissolve your chronic pain, stress, and anxiety, then give us a call at 954-900-2179. Mention that you heard our Stress Free Now podcast show, and you'll receive a free gift from us. Call today to schedule your free consultation. For Christine Wright, this is Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of StressFreeNow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.